Good evening. Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call of tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the October meeting of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting. My name is Tom Byrne, RTM moderator. Are there any suggested changes to the draft minutes of our September meeting? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes of the September meeting are hereby adopted upon unanimous consent. Donald Heller, Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks. I appreciate very much the opportunity to appear before you, and a special thanks to Mr. Byrne for granting me the time. My purpose is to update you on the progress of the POCD to date. We have met with many of you during the course of the year, and some 400 citizens have made their thoughts and ideas known to us. We also have written reports from all departments and commissions connected with land use. On this score, each of the town departments and commissions were asked to examine the POC draft as it applies to them before any submission to P&Z public hearing or the RTM. The ideas are to ensure that they are in agreement with the proposed recommendations affecting their organizations. One of you gave us this suggestion, and it is a good one, because each organization, and this includes P&Z, will then accept responsibility in the final accepted POCD. Putting this all together has taken longer than we planned, particularly given the wide variety of opinions and recommendations reviewed by us, which are often strongly presented and many of which are highly controversial. We are now reorganizing the plan, working closely with our consultants. The recommendations will be simplified and action-oriented for now or for future implementation after careful study. You will note when examining the plan that important provisions were made for yearly progress reports to help ensure that the plan is kept as current as possible. One of you in particular was of special value to us. He identified the RTM as the voice of the people. Now, in this town, we have so many organs of government, the Selectman's Office, the BET, the commissions, the special boards, and so on. One can sometimes not give the weight to the fact that you folks are critically essential. All the P&Z commissioners understand and respect this. The role of the commission here is to prepare a plan while independent of everyone in the sense of being as objective and free from possible political influence as humanly possible. That is acceptable to you and the residents of Greenwich. The overriding thought is that we are all here because we love the town. Greenwich is a very, very special place, and we want to keep it that for the next 10 years at least. Now, as to the dates, per town charter, P&Z is required to hold a public hearing to adopt the POCD prior to seeking RTM approval. Because we will not be ready in November with the final revised document, and because most feel December is not suitable for this kind of meeting, we will hold a public hearing in January. The final revised POCD will be made available in December for the public to read well before the January public hearing. At that meeting, comments from the public will be taken before we adopt the POCD. The RTM does not meet in February, so we will submit the final plan to you for the March call. This should leave ample time for much communication about the plan. And I thank you very much for your cooperation.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. Stephen Walko, Chairman of the BET.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the representative town meeting, fellow citizens. Copies of the budget guidelines for fiscal year 9-10 are located on a table at the entrance of this auditorium. These guidelines set forth the BET's current thinking of the limitations on the 9-10 budget. I'll read for you just two very brief portions of those guidelines just to give you a flavor for what's in there, but I do urge you to read the guidelines to better understand the BET's current thinking. First, on page 2, and I quote, "The budget guidelines recommend that for fiscal year 10 budget are within the customary BET guidelines of 2 to 4%. These guidelines provide direction in connection with the creation of plans and objectives for all departments and agencies." I would also note that for the first time, the BET has offered in the BET guidelines a preamble. I'm going to quote from one small paragraph of that preamble. "Because of economic and related financial conditions, which are quite likely to impact us adversely during and beyond fiscal year 9 and fiscal year 10, we feel that it would be prudent to reduce the rate of growth of town spending for the operational budget and to reduce the capital budget." These guidelines are the first step in our budget process and for the coming fiscal year 10 budget. As you all know, the BET takes a hard look at the budget when the first selectman presents his consolidated budget to us in February, and then we pass it along to you at your May meeting. If any member, and probably more importantly any committee, has questions regarding these guidelines, please contact the Finance Department. And what I'd like to do this year is if we have a BET representative available for your December meeting, if your committee so chooses, we'll try to have someone there for you to answer questions regarding the guidelines, which I think will just open up the communication between our two bodies. Lastly, I'd like to thank the BET Budget Committee chaired by Michael Mason, along with Robert Stone, Larry Simon, and Ed Krummick, for all of their hard work and effort that went into these guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joan Caldwell, Chairman of the Special Committee on RTM Organization.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting. The special committee appointed by Mr. Burns on procedures and rules of the RTM has met probably about a dozen times, and we have drafted a rather long list of ideas for things that we might consider for changing or improving the procedure here in the hall and in the deliberations. We are at the point now when we would like to hear from you. So if any of you have any items that come to mind, things that you think should be changed or added or revised in some way, would you be kind enough to communicate them to our chair, Karen Sadek-Khan, via email, to me via snail mail, or to your district chair who can give them to us? We would like to have these so that we can begin to discuss them at a meeting that we're going to be having at the end of November, which I have targeted for exactly this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. And right. I think we all understood that. Karen Sadek-Khan is the secretary of that special committee. Thank you very much. And Michael Petroselli, who is chairman of our Budget Overview Committee.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Welcome, and hello, fellow members, fellow citizens. On behalf of the Budget Overview Committee, I asked Mr. Byrne for about 5 minutes tonight to talk briefly about the recently issued BET budget guidelines that Mr. Walko just referred to. As you all know, the BET issues these guidelines each year to assist the First Selectmen, the appointing authorities, and the department heads in their preparation of operating and capital budgets. Historically, these guidelines are issued in September just after our summer recess, and sometimes that makes timing a bit challenging. This year, the BET decided to have a first reading of the guidelines in September and then issue the guidelines in October to provide more time for public review and public input. This has been a really fantastic change in practice. The BOC thinks this has been a very positive change, and we're making it our priority to work closely with the BET and the First Selectman during the budget process. A copy of the guideline, as Mr. Walko mentioned, is available tonight outside the door. Many of you received it via email, and if you haven't received it tonight or through email, it is available on the town website. Mr. Walko also mentioned that this year the preamble was added to the guideline in recognition of the financial events that have occurred globally over the past few weeks and months. In it, the BET acknowledges the financial challenges that the town faces in the coming fiscal year and the years beyond, and looks to provide for additional flexibility during the upcoming budget process. I want to read a quote from page 2 of the guidelines, and I'm going to quote, "To the extent that revenue continues to lag behind budget and is not offset by prompt and effective steps to reduce expenditures in both fiscal year 09 and fiscal year 10, then the fund balance will be lower than projected at the end of fiscal year 09. End quote. Now, other options include larger tax increases and more debt, both of which we should seek to avoid. I think what that statement says is we do face some potentially tough times. It's time for us to start doing things differently. As Mr. Walko indicated, the guidelines indicate that the BET remains committed to a mill rate increase within its own 2 to 4% range, this year targeting about 3.5%. This would be the 9th consecutive year of such an increase. To hold the mill rate at that level, we can incur additional debt or we can reduce spending, as is clearly outlined in the guidelines. Within the guidelines, and again, I encourage everyone to read it themselves, the BET makes some very specific recommendations about how we could potentially save some money. One of them, the reduction of 15 positions in town for non-essential services inside the town, not to be replaced by outsourcing, and the reduction of 23 certified staff positions at the Board of Education. The Board of Ed reductions combined with lower enrollment will return the town to its recent average range of certified staff to student ratio. Next, an overall 3% cap on non-salary operating expenses, excluding energy costs, which will be monitored separately, and fortunately, at least for now, that trend seems to be favorable. To delay where feasible and limit new capital spending to no more than $25.5 million in the coming year. It should be noted this would be a reduction from the $88 million that was forecasted. Also, we should continue to target moderate increases in new labor contracts in the range of 2.9 to 3.75 in total costs. Although the 3.5% mill rate increase is viewed by many as moderate, it is important to understand that the town's spending has increased by more than that for the past several years. In fact, the town's total spending this year would increase by over 5% if steps aren't taken to reduce spending, which the BET calls for in their guidelines. Any increased spending beyond our mill rate would have to be financed by either growth in the grand list, increases in other fees, or additional borrowings. It's important to understand that our tax increases alone have not covered our spending increases. Additionally, and this is important to note, our 3.5% mill rate increase, although modest by many standards, has exceeded the rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index for the past 5 and 10-year periods. In those periods, the CPI grew on average by 3.04% and 2.69% respectively. Our mill rate has grown by 3.5%. And I want to put things in perspective of how the town spends its money. The Board of Education budget, as proposed in the guideline of $127 million, represents approximately 1/3 of the entire town's budget. All salaries of the town employees, including the salaries of Board of Education employees, represent approximately 55% of the entire town budget. Healthcare costs represent another 11%. Therefore, salaries, wages, and healthcare costs not accounting for pension costs, account for nearly 2/3 of the town's budget. New capital expenditures of approximately $25 million this year, or $38 million when accounting for pay-as-you-go, represent about 10% of the budget. In the guidelines, the BET continues to emphasize completing ongoing initiatives and maintenance of the town's and the Board of Education's existing infrastructure before starting new initiatives, and also encouraging long-term capital planning with better documentation and more complete project requests. In the guideline on page 6, the BE discusses its belief that sharing staff between the town and the Board of Education in the area of infrastructure, maintenance, construction, inspection, planning, and custodial services would enable us to have better skilled staff with greater expertise where required, while leveraging all the resources of the town. The combination of staff would provide a uniform system of addressing construction and maintenance of all town infrastructures and hopefully lead to real cost savings. Again, an area we need to look at doing things differently and being more creative. The town of Greenwich is very fortunate to have many very talented members serving it, and many of those people serve in this body. We need to leverage that talent. We have a collective responsibility over the next several months to participate in the process. As you know, the budget arrives mostly in numeric form. It's not easy reading the guidelines. It's even more challenging to read the budget itself. It's important to ask questions of department heads of how they operate, the services they deliver, and how they deliver them. It's important to ask questions about capital projects and spending and priorities. There's nothing wrong with asking questions and understanding. There's over 200 people in this body, and we can lend a hand to the BET. It's important to participate in this process starting now so we don't show up here like we do every May and try to make cosmetic changes until midnight, and quite frankly, nothing ever changes. It's our responsibility to participate in the process starting now. The Budget Overview Committee has assigned delegates to focus on particular departments and services, and we will be working with the BET. For example, the Department of Social Services will be making a presentation to the BET in November when, among other things, it will be benchmarking itself to other comparable communities. The BOC will participate in that meeting. If the Budget Overview Committee can assist any individual, any committee, in any way during this budget process, please let us know. If you have information you think would be helpful, either channel it directly to the BET link that Steve will tell us about, who that person is, or funnel it through us and we'll get it to Steve and Mike Mason. The BET they've been really fantastic about communication. They want our input, they want our help, they want our ideas. So I'd encourage everyone now, let's be part of the process and not complain about the process in May. Let's get this done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think all of us are aware that last weekend we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the beginning of grassroots democracy in Greenwich, the founding of the representative town meeting. And while we can all be proud of those 75 years, I think most will, if not all, will agree that we can all be proud of the celebration that was put together really as a result of a community effort. And I think it appropriate this last time to give thanks to those who helped us celebrate that milestone. Outside of the RTM, I want to thank Joe Siciliano, who is Director of Parks and Recreation, and his staff, who did a fabulous job in helping us set up and making a wonderful presentation. And the Board of Education that made available its facilities to us at the high school, the custodial staff and the kitchen staff that worked long and hard, again, to make it such an enjoyable event. Those who attended received a program that has a list of many other names, which I will not read, but I do believe it appropriate to put on the record, which we make with Channel 79, and I'd like to say a few words about that shortly. Those who volunteered, beginning back in April, to work through the summer to make that event possible. And I'll ask as I call the names of those who served on that committee if they would please stand, and at the end we could thank them appropriately. Jerry Anderson, District 10, Louise Bavis, District 3, Jim Boutel of District 8, Carl Carlson of District 1, Carol Ducray of District 6, Susan Elliott of District 9, Karen Fasiliotis of District 7, Suzanne Geis Robbins of District 2, Bob McKnight, District 4, Miriam Menon of District 12, and I leave last but not least the chairman of this group, who I first realized this woman's love of the history of Greenwich when she was out in the summer of 2007 trying to recruit members for the November election in 2007. And you heard her last year come and talk about that effort. And she followed through researching our history, getting documents, putting a booklet together, along with the efforts of her family, her husband, William. But the chairman of this celebration committee is Despina Fasiliotis of District 11. And thank you to all. And of course, thank you to all for coming and bringing that delicious food and the refreshments, and the company was delightful. So again, thank you to all. One thing I did neglect to mention on that occasion was the efforts over the years to bring the RTM to the community. We meet here in Central Middle School Auditorium, and we could go about our business virtually unknown to most of the community, but for the efforts of those who report on what we do. And I wanted to thank the reporters, the print reporters, Neil Vigder, who's our current representative, Ken Borsick of the Greenwich Post, Pat McCormick of the Greenwich Citizen, Neil Vigder, of course, of the Greenwich Time. And over the years, we once were brought to the community on the local radio station, WGCH, which was then owned by John Becker, who had been a member of the RTM in the past. And then when that coverage ceased, we were at a crossroads, and it actually worked out, I think, for the better of the RTM when what we now know as Channel 79, but to me, Channel 79 is really Paul Curtis of District 9, who has made that such a tremendous community resource. And just so Paul actually was at our celebration at the high school, filming from back on one of the stairwells. And this is a constant with Paul. I had to return this lectern this afternoon, and when I got here at 5:30, Paul was here setting up. He'll be here, as you know, well after you leave. And he's a one-man show tonight. He's just an incredible resource. So. Thank you, Paul. And Paul, I asked him to make this announcement, but since he's the one-armed paper hanger tonight, he asked me to do it. And those who have said, well, I can't watch Channel 79 because I don't have Cablevision, now have no excuse. Channel 79 is now being simulcast live over the internet. All you need to do is go to the GCTV website. The address is GHTTP, etc. gctv.greenwich.org. And there will be a link called Watch Now. You click on that link no matter where you are around the world, and you can watch what is presently showing on Channel 79. Now, that doesn't mean we can have shout-outs to Brother John in California when you get up here. But Channel 79, as well as public and educational access, have been moved to digital cable channels. In order to watch Channel 79 on Cablevision, you need to have a cable converter. If you already have a cable box, then you don't need to do anything. But if you do not have a cable box, you can call Cablevision and receive one cable box at no charge and no monthly charge thereafter. And this offer apparently is available only until December 31st of this year. So because of that switch over to digital cable channels, you have to have a box, and you can get one for free if you act by the end of this year. And with that, I think we've taken care of our administrative details. That now brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. And I did notify all district and committee chairs last night that it had been my intention, based on the reports received, to recommend that we combine the following items. There would be no consent calendar tonight, but we would combine the following items: 2 and 3, and 6 and 8. Now, a question had arisen about item 7. There was an answer provided, so I am going to slightly modify my suggested combination of items for voting purposes to include item 7, which is an appointment of a current member of SWRPA, a reappointment. Include that with the combined items. So it is my recommendation, based on all reports received, that we suspend the rules to combine the following items for voting purposes: items 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8. I've been informed that item 4, which is the Silver Shield contract, has been withdrawn. That should come back to us in December. And that would therefore leave, if we were to adopt such a motion to suspend the rules, that would leave items 1, 5, and 9 to be considered separately. So, is there a motion to suspend the rules to combine items 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules to combine items 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8 for voting purposes. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable and requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of suspending the rules to combine items 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8 for voting purposes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. We will begin with the combined items, and then we will proceed with the separate items in numerical order. So, items 2 and 3, which we will consider together, now come before us. Princess Urfe, not to be confused with Urfe Porter, will present that resolution.
Thank you, and good evening. Item number 2 is the resolution of the Board of Estimate and Taxation authorizing the appropriation of the funds for the Community Development Block Grant Program for year 2009. The total anticipated funds are approximately $969,049.45. Item number 3 is the resolution of the First Selectman seeking the representative town meeting's authorization to apply for and accept the anticipated CDBG funds for year 2009.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolutions 2 and 3? The resolutions on items 2 and 3 have been moved and seconded, and I understand they do require a public hearing, which we will open after we get our committee reports. So those 2 items now are before us. May we have the reports of the committees that consider that? Beginning with Pamela Frederick, Chairman of our Finance Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members, and guests. The item was presented to the Finance Committee by Princess Urfe. We discussed and voted on items 2 and 3 together. The Community Development Department is seeking approval to apply for HUD grants per their action plan, which has been submitted to the RTM and also approved by the BET and authorized by the First Selectman, seeking to apply for and accept the grant. The town is seeking $900,000 new HUD federal entitlements, in addition to $38,700 loan repayment and $30,300 funding reprogramming. This totals $969,049, and it covers January through December 2009. Funding includes $140,800 for public service requests that are being recommended. There are 1 new program being the At Home in Greenwich, which will support independent living for seniors. The program will assist in funding membership fees for various in-home assistance programs and services. The second category, $667,700 for building rehab and acquisitions. These were being recommended. One of the new fundings is for the, actually there are three, Friends of Nathaniel Witherall for their indoor-outdoor garden, the food bank property, and the YWCA's domestic abuse service office conversion. And the remaining $160,500 will be for fund administration. The committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Doug Wells, Chairman of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, we took up items 2 and 3 last Monday evening. Appearing before our committee was Princess Urfe of the Community Development Office. Our committee focused more on the language of the resolutions than the money. She pointed out that the substantive changes to the resolutions from last year's resolutions provides for increases and modifications to the Witherell appropriations, and makes note of the fact that there is a total of $30,331.45 in funds that were left over from the 2007 plan year. 10,000 of those funds were earmarked for a liberation program, which was not used by that entity, and the balance of slightly over $20,000, which were monies budgeted for administrative costs, were not used in 2007. Finally, in the last further resolve clause of item 2, the Department of Nathaniel Witherell has been added to the resolution. This was done to permit Witherell to accept funds from the block program in the event that the entity known as the Friends of Nathaniel Witherell ceases to exist. Our committee noted some typographical errors. I don't know if you want me to do those now or after the end of the reports, but there are some minor revisions to grammar.
All right, why don't we finish the reports and I'll bring you back for that.
Okay. Our vote on the combined items as revised with the changes that I'll discuss later was 10 in favor, none opposed, with 1 abstention.
Thank you. And Jerry Isaacson, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, fellow members. Princess Urfe came to our committee on last Tuesday about the block grants and presented them. I raised a question with her about why most requests were so dramatically pared down, and rather than granting them in full with fewer approvals so that they could still stay within the funds available. Ms. Urfe explained that the sums were agreed upon through discussion with the entities, and so the available, and also so the available funds could be used for the broadest possible impact. Our vote was 11-0-0 with District 9 absent.
Thank you. At this point, I will open the public hearing on items 2 and 3. Mr. Wells?
Our committee noted that there is 3 references to the book that we all received in the mail back in September. And the references in the call does not match the name of the booklet that came to us. And so we made a change in each of the 3 paragraphs to correct that and make it conform with the book that we actually received. On page 2 of the call, in the second whereas clause, there's reference to the book that begins in the 3rd line. It's called the Community Development Block Grant. What we did is inserted the words proposed 2009 in front of the word community, and then deleted the word proposed, which is the 5th line in your call, and put it in its place annual 1 year, so that the document that's referred to in the call is now known as the proposed 2009 Community Development Block Grant Annual 1 Year Action Plan. That change is made in that clause on page 2, also in the first resolve clause on page 3, and the first full resolve clause on page 4. Those are the 3 places where the document is referenced. We also added on page 2 the second whereas clause at the end of the line where it says pages 95 through 98. We inserted the word and so that it reads correctly. And then finally on page 4 of the call, at the end of the first full resolve clause, at the end of the reference to the U.S. Code at SEC, we inserted a semicolon and the word "and" to conform with the body of the document.
All right, thank you. That motion to amend being offered on behalf of one of our committees does not require a second. We can adopt motions by unanimous consent. Is there any objection to those proposed amendments? Hearing none and absent objection, those amendments are adopted upon unanimous consent. Discussion on items 2 and 3. Item 6 now comes before us. Wayne Fox, our town attorney.
Good evening. This resolution comes to you from the Historic District Commission and Susan Richardson. Resolved to consider and act upon the report of the Stanwich Historic District Study Committee, to consider and act upon the resolution in accordance with Section 7-147B of the Connecticut General Statutes. Be it resolved that the report of the Historic District Commission, being the same as hereby accepted, further resolved that the ordinance which is before you, being the same as hereby enacted, to carry out the provisions of Section 7-147A to 7-147K of the Connecticut General Statutes.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 6 has been moved and seconded. Franklin Bloomer, chairman of our Land Use Committee.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of town meeting, guests, good evening. The Land Use Committee considered this item at its meeting last Monday evening. It was presented to us by Susan Richardson, who was the chair of the Historic District Commission during the rather lengthy time period required to bring this item to us. It would adopt an ordinance establishing the Stanwich Historic District along Taconic Road from a point south of Crown Lane to a point north of North Stanwich Road. The ordinance, if you've looked at it, includes metes and bounds descriptions of the properties included within the district. The effect of the establishment of the district is the changes or remodeling of the properties within it are restricted in ways that will preserve the historic character of the area. The town has 2 existing historic districts. One is known as the Strickland Road Historic District, and it's in Coscob in the vicinity of the Bush Holly House. The second one is known as the Round Hill John Street Historic District, and it is where those 2 roads intersect. The town also has 2 historic properties. This is where a single property has essentially the same restrictions that would be applicable in a historic district. Those are at 29 Taconic Road and 640 Round Hill Road. The procedure for establishment of historic districts is governed by state law. You just had the town attorney recite the sections of those of the statutes that apply. It's also administered by a state agency, the Historic Preservation Council. We established an historic district study committee at our meeting on October 22, 2006, and that committee, excuse me, prepared a report analyzing the historic significance of the proposed district and the buildings and other objects within the district. You have that report. It was one of the items distributed with the call for this meeting. Very briefly, Stanwich was established as a new parish by an act of the Connecticut General Assembly in 1732. It became a separate school district in 1753, and an old schoolhouse, not the original one, but its successor, still stands. You can see it on North Stanwich Road. At one time, Stanwich also had a separate private boys' school, a post office, an inn, which was in a building that is still there, a store, a shoe manufactory, a tailor shop, and 2 churches, one of which is still in use. So it was a real community in its own right within the larger Greenwich community. The report went to the state. The state had to satisfy itself that this was a site that was appropriate for designation. That is to say, the state then polled the affected properties. 100% of the affected properties support the establishment of the district. Indeed, the impetus for the designation came from property owners within the district, including Russell Reynolds, who attended the Land Use Committee meeting last Monday evening. 1 or more additional property owners have indicated an interest in including their properties in the district, which would require an amendment to the ordinance and thus additional action on our part. Our vote was 11 in favor, none opposed, with one abstention. The one abstaining vote arrived quite late in the debate and chose not to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Wells with the Legislative and Rules report.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee took this item up last Monday evening. Joining us was Assistant Town Attorney John Wetmore, along with Susan Richardson and other members of the Historic District Commission, and Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, two of the homeowners who are making this application to have these properties declared as a historic district. This resolution asks the RTM to do two things. One is to enact the ordinance that is in conformance with Section 7-147 of the General Statutes, and to accept the report of the Historic District Commission. Attorney Wetmore provided our committee with the opinion that this resolution is in legal order. He pointed out that this is essentially a 10-step proceeding. Mr. Bloomer just gave you a rendition of all those steps, and I won't reiterate that. What I will tell you is that the only things that are left to do if we pass this resolution this evening is that the part of the call is then recorded on the land records, including the legal description that's part of the call, and to provide notice in the newspaper. One of our committee members wanted to know the practical effect of this designation. Ms. Richardson explained that it essentially creates a situation where the Historic District Commission serves as a planning and zoning board as it relates to any proposed changes to the exterior of the buildings within the district. Not only will they have to get planning and zoning approval for any structural changes, but also get the approval of the Historic District Commission if the exterior of the building is changed in any way. Our vote on this matter was taken as to legal order, 11-0-0 with District 10 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 6. Item 7 now comes before us. Mr. von Keyserling. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is not our Appointments Committee. Lynn Lavery, our Selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. Be it resolved that the following named persons nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Southwestern Regional Planning Agency for a term expiring 3/31/12. It's actually a reappointment. Paul C. Settlemyer.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. Franklin Bloomer with the report of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening again. The Land Use Committee met with Mr. Settlemyer at our meeting last Monday evening. He is a member of the RTM, and he's known to many of you. He has served on the Southwestern Regional Planning Agency, SWERPA for short, since 2006. Previously, he was treasurer of the agency. At present, he is chairman. He's also been active in Greenwich Civic Affairs and is a past president of TAG, the Transportation Association of Greenwich. The appointment is for a 3-year term, which will begin on April 1st, 2009, which is over 5 months away. The Land Use Committee was aware of and discussed the fact that this appointment is being made unusually early. The reason, very simply, is that Paul is currently chairman, as I stated, and he is up for reappointment for that position in January, which is 2 months before his current term as a member of SWERPA expires. If he is reappointed as a member of SWERPA before January, the likelihood of his being reappointed as chairman is, of course, stronger. After discussing Paul's contribution to the agency since he has been there, we felt he had been an effective chairman and that Greenwich would like to see one of its delegates continue as chairman of the agency. Accordingly, our vote was 12 in favor, none opposed, with no abstentions.
Thank you. Mr. von Keyserling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
Mr. Settlemyer appeared before our committee on September 30th. He's a gentleman, he's a member of District 2, and it's a reappointment as mentioned. Mr. Settlemyer devotes approximately 1 to 2 days a week to the business of SWERPA. He was before this, he was the he was the chairman of their subcommittee on housing, and as is just mentioned, he was elected the chairman, which we hope will continue. He's well versed in all the aspects concerning SWERPA, which is an advisory committee. There's some confusion apparently as to whether SWRPA is a pseudo-county government or not. It is not. It is purely advisory. It has no powers except to advise and to review. People should be careful about that because the RTM went through large discussion when we first started SWRPA of whether we join it or not on that basis of whether we had any, whether we gave up any of our own sovereignty, so to speak, as a town, and that's not the case. So I just wanted to dispel that thinking that was going around. We talked to Mr. Settlemyer. We discussed many of the different areas, not only housing, which he, of course, is well based in, but in transportation and other issues. We voted for him 12-0-0 in support of his renomination. I'd like to take a personal privilege. One of the groups that was not thought of, thanked, I think, sufficiently enough was the clerk's office for all the work they did in supporting the research that was done to find out who was members of the RTM and how long and where they were, which is hours and hours of work. And the staff did a huge job on that, and I think they deserve thanks for it.
Vincent DeMarco, Chairman of our Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, members. Because of one of the major functions of the Regional Planning Agency is the study and coordination of transportation plans and initiatives for its member municipalities, this position is very important to the Transportation Committee, and therefore we felt it appropriate to take the item up. Paul Settlemyer has been a valuable source of information for the committee for several terms, and as always provided us with updates on current and pending projects that SWRPA is involved with as they pertain to Greenwich. He also gave us every indication that he would like to continue to hold this position as well as to be eligible for re-election as chairman of the agency. The committee voted 11 in favor, none opposed, District 7 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 7. Peter Crumbine, our selectman.
Well, I'm delighted to hear the votes by the committees. Paul Settlemyer is one of the finest citizens we have in town. But I just wanted to make a comment about the questions raised about when we did the nomination. In the past, we as selectmen have been pressured, particularly by the appointments committee, to do our work early rather than later. And so here we were, Johnny on the spot, getting our nominations in early, and we got this pushback. We are working very hard to get our nominations in, so this won't be the first one that you will get for a term that expires next March. Thank you very much.
Well, if I might comment on that, what the selectmen do is to bring it before us. When we act on it is a different issue. I think particularly if we're talking about different individuals being appointed to a position, we may want to seriously consider whether we would make such an appointment so far in advance of the expiration of a term. So I would like our committees to consider that issue. Just because the selectmen provide it, which we are grateful for, does not mean we have to go forward at that particular time. Further discussion on item 7. Item 8 now comes before us. Peter Crumbine, our selectman.
Since I'm already sitting there, very convenient. Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of that board, of the Board of Health, for a term expiring 3/31/2012. Michael J. Franco, MD.
Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 8 has been moved and seconded. Jerry Isaacson, Chairman of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. By the way, before I begin, there's a very minor typo in the resolved paragraph. It says Board or Health, and should be Board of Health. It's not of vital significance, but it's there.
We'll make that upon unanimous consent. We'll make that change. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Franco came before our committee last Tuesday. He's presently medical director of the intensive care unit at Greenwich Hospital. He's a Riverside native, graduate of Greenwich High School. He has recently worked with Tom Mahoney of the Health Department on the Greenwich Coalition to improve end-of-life care. Our vote was 10-1-0. District 1 voting no because Dr. Franco has no public health training, and District 9 was absent.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keyserling with the Appointments Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We met with Dr. Michael Franco on September 30th also. As you know, a new appointment for the Board of Health. He's entering the public service, although he's been very active in the private area in the town. He's a native, returning to practice in the town in his pulmonary medicine. He's been very successful and very prominent in the Greenwich Hospital activities, and his latest contribution was in the Board of Selectmen's Environmental Committee under Selectman Lavery, and heading up their subcommittee on organic control in fields. And we'd had a long conversation with him. Ms. Lavery was present with as we discussed these things. There was a question about conflict of time and focus of his duties on the Board of Health, but there appeared an ability on his part to balance these. We were pleased to endorse Dr. Franco's appointment with a 12-0-0 vote. And I do appreciate that the selectmen are coming to us early, but, you know, careful what we pray for, I guess. Thank you.
Discussion on item 8.
Mr. Moderator, one moment.
Mr. Boutel?
Yeah, Mr. Moderator.
It began last March.
Okay. My question, Mr. Moderator, I was asking the chairman, is the length of this term. It is a new nomination. If the term began last March, I'd ask who he's replacing. If it's in fact a 3-year term beginning next March, this is one that where perhaps we shouldn't act tonight because we're appointing him to a position that doesn't exist yet. So my question is, what is the beginning of the term, and if it began last March, who is he replacing?
Mr. Von Keyserling?
I believe the answer is the term did begin last November, last March, and it is a term that's already commenced, and it's to replace Ms. Elaine Suchman, who's served very well and long, by the way. I think deserves some recognition for her long service, and thanks.
All right, so this is a 4-year term then, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. All right, and that would have begun on April 1st of 2008. Thank you. Okay. Further discussion on item 8. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Combined items numbers 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will continue with the business of the meeting. The first of the separate items is item number 1. That is the sense of the meeting resolution that was before us in September and was postponed to this meeting. So item number 1 is now before us. May I ask the committee chairs to assemble and may we get the reports of the committees that considered item number 1. Doug Wells, Chairman of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee took this item up last Monday evening. We had Mary Ferry, who is the Legislative and Rules Committee member from District 5, speak on behalf of the resolution. Our committee was generally pleased with the BET's response to the 3 issues brought up in the sense of the meeting resolution. We were of the belief that Ms. Ferry's resolution accomplished its primary goal, that the BET provide us with their assumptions and conclusions, and how it intends to deal with the cost of maintaining our infrastructure while limiting our bonding obligations while keeping our taxes at a reasonable level. The committee was pleased to see that the BET agrees that there should not be capitalization of band interest, and some were pleased that the BET will try to maintain the mill rate increases in the 3 to 4% range. Our committee thanks Mary Ferry for her good work in bringing this resolution to the attention of the BET. We believe that this resolution is a constructive way to initiate and hopefully maintain dialogue with the BET and the RTM about these very important financial issues. Last May at our budget meeting, when Ms. Ferry moved to delete the provision for ban interest that was presented in our budget, Mr. Walko stated words to the effect that a line item veto of the bonding resolution was an inappropriate way for the town to conduct its financial business. So Ms. Ferry rightly brought this resolution to the BET in a timely manner in order to get the BET to address the issues and to educate our body. At our meeting last Monday, Ms. Ferry advocated that the committee vote on the resolution so that the BET and the town could look to this resolution as a referendum for what the taxpayers want for our financial future. Excuse me. However, the committee could not reach a consensus for the following reasons. Some could not support the resolution because the BET did not commit to the second bullet point of the resolution concerning the borrowing limitations. Others were concerned that the resolution as drafted was not conservative enough. Given the dire economic circumstances that we face, many felt that the mill rate increase of 3 to 4% may prove to be too expensive for our taxpayers, given the economic downturn and the potential for a devalued grand list. I would not support this resolution as drafted because the reference to Nathaniel Witherell in the resolution could be seen as the RTM's acceptance of bonding for that project, to which I am resolutely opposed. Finally, at least one member of the committee could not support the resolution as drafted because of his concern that this resolution to the BET might be a violation of the charter, which leaves the financial decisions of the town to the BET. For all of the above reasons, we voted to postpone indefinitely this resolution. Our vote on the motion to postpone was 10 in favor, 1 opposed, with District 10 absent. The one negative vote was that of Ms. Ferry.
Thank you. Pamela Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, members and guests. The item was presented by Mary Ferry and Fred Baker as a petition since the meeting resolution. In September, the Finance Committee voted 11-0-1 to postpone the since the meeting resolution until October to allow the BET time to respond. The current vote for the item was 7-3-2 to postpone indefinitely. And I'll go into our reasoning why. First of all, we'd like to thank Mary Ferry and Fred Baker for opening the discussion on the town's financing plans, particularly as it relates to bonding, a discussion that typically does not take place until the May budget review. In September, the committee was not supportive of this since the meeting resolution, given too much uncertainty of the potential impact. While it was deemed to be well-intentioned, it was also felt to be a bit simplistic in its approach to a fairly complex issue. Great concern continues to be expressed with limiting the town's financial flexibility, although the committee is very supportive of what we believe was the ultimate goal of the item, and that being to limit spending and tax increases. The Board of Selectmen, BET, and RTM, along with taxpayers, will have to make tough choices to significantly reduce spending and to cancel or defer non-essential projects. Where capital projects are continued in order to maintain low taxes, some level of bonding may be necessary. Limiting bonding, its amount and tenor, on the other hand, requires either spending cuts and or acceptance of higher taxes. Spending, taxes, and bonding are choices that one makes. Changing one greatly impacts the others. We believe that maintaining flexibility to prudently optimize the town's choices is necessary, and that we believe is reflected in our vote. Rather than binding the BET and controller's ability to optimize its financing solutions, given this economic time, the RTM should actively work to restrict spending by focusing on needs such as safety and education, and eliminate non-essential projects. While support of the original objective of the CIP was expressed, there was also great disapproval of what we believe it has devolved to become, a wish list that each interest group feels will be funded once their project reaches the list. This, we believe, must stop. The petitioners were successful in having the BET to confirm a continued objective of limiting taxes and limiting tax increases to no more than 4%, and the elimination of capitalizing ban interest. We voted 7-3-2 to postpone indefinitely, with the no votes, while against the resolution felt that the postponement would stifle bonding discussions, which the sense of the meeting resolution was able to achieve. Although not approved, Mary and Fred, we believe, were successful in achieving their objective of raising these issues, generating discussion, and obtaining agreement from the BET on key bonding issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Isaacson with the Health and Human Services report.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Based on the report from the BET's Budget Committee, we felt that the major points and concerns were addressed in their guidelines. That document, for example, seemed to agree that bans should not be capitalized, which was a major concern. Motion was made and seconded that this item be postponed indefinitely. The vote on the motion was 8-3-0, District 9 absent. The no votes felt that the RTM should express its own concerns rather than going this route.
Thank you. Susan Carmichael with the report of the Town Services Committee.
The committee would like to publicly acknowledge the hard work and dedication of our fellow committee member, Mary Ferry, in bringing this resolution in front of the RTM. We believe that this resolution has allowed all the committees of the RTM to seriously begin a dialogue on fiscal restraint, the mill rate, and the concept of borrowing for town capital projects. Most members felt, however, that the resolution did not go far enough and that giving the BET guidelines to raise the mill rates in the 3 to 4% range was in this environment too much. Most felt that the resolution should be postponed indefinitely as it no longer adequately reflected the current economic environment. 3 members felt that the resolution should be sent to the BOC for further analysis. The committee voted 7-3-1. Districts 5, 6, and 7 opposed the motion to postpone, and District 7 abstained because he could see the potential for either way. District 12 was absent.
Thank you. Before getting the next report, I do have the result of the vote on our combined items. Those were items 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8. Those in favor, 191. Opposed, 0. Abstaining, 0. Those combined items have carried. Continuing with the reports on item 1, Karen Sadekhan, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening. Our committee met Tuesday night and discussed this item. We did have Mike Mason with us, who's always with us at our meetings from the BET. After much discussion with Mike and amongst us, we voted 0-12. Our vote was based on 3 observations from the committee. 1, in lieu of the economy, this is not the right time to take up this recommendation. 2, financial policies are indeed the purview of the BET, and they should make policy as factors influence them. And 3, it is undesirable to be locked into an increase forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Brady, Chair of our Education Committee.
Good evening. The Education Committee met last Monday night. All districts were represented. Nothing to add. We voted 0-9-3.
Robert Cavee, Chair of the Public Works Committee.
Vice Chair. The RTM Public Works Committee met on Monday, October 20th, to consider item 1, the proposed sense of the meeting resolution. 8 districts were represented, with districts 1, 2, 4, and 5 absent. The committee voted 2 in favor, that's districts 7 and 9, and 6 opposed to the resolution. Districts 3, 6, 8, 9, 10, and 12 opposed. The discussion was diverse, with the overall consensus that the resolution was stale because it was based on recent historical terms and did not reflect the background of changes in the economic reality of the town, the state, the federal government, and of the world. For example, one member suggested that the 2009-2010 mill rate increase should be held to 0%. In fact, the October BET 2009-2010 budget guidelines contain a spreadsheet, which is on page 11 of the budget guidelines, which suggests as a first cut that the required property tax revenues will increase by $22.6 million, or 8.4%, from $268.8 million to $291.4 million in 2009-2010. With a 1% offset for a projected increase in the property grand list, this will imply a 7.4 increase in the mill rate, and that's on page 11 of the guidelines. We would have to imagine very aggressive cuts in personnel. That was the first cut, of course. Very aggressive cuts in personnel expenses and headcounts to contain the mill rate sufficiently to approach the level projected by the resolution. There's something like $20 million required to come off. Not 40 people or something like that. The BET guidelines appear to have conceded the point that the interest expenses for a 2-year bond anticipation note bands will be expensed rather than capitalized. The Public Works Committee highlighted the fact that over the past few years, operational expenses such as routine annual paving expenses of highly trafficked roads have migrated from the operational budget to the capital budget. The BET has somewhat contained the 2009 capital budget by moving $23.4 million for the Greenwich High School auditorium construction to the following year, and the $29.8 million Nathaniel Witherall Project Renew application was deferred. Perhaps the process should be named budget as you go, not pay as you go.
Peter Berg, Vice Chairman of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening. The Land Use Committee did not take this item up this month. Rather, it took it up when it first came to us on September 8th, following the joint meeting that had been held that evening. Our discussion was very brief. Our vote was 5 in favor, 5 against, 2 abstentions, District 5 and 9. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von Kaiserling with the Appointments Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We met last month, as others did, on this. We, like the other committees, felt that we declined support of this resolution of the vote of 1 in favor, 6 against, 2 abstentions. Felt that what we felt has been borne out by subsequent comments on the BET, et cetera, but basically what others have said about tying the hands of the BET, and that they're the ones who have to do the work. We set policy, but they do the work. District 1 delegate was in strong support of the resolution, fearing runaway taxes, and wanted a suspension of the CIP program. The interesting thing is, after we dealt with the specific resolution itself, discussion turned to a third alternative, and during the discussion there coalesced a consensus by all of the committee that the best approach by the town to financing the CIP would be to pay it off as we went. That is, to replace the bonding with a dedicated surtax against a fixed inventory of capital projects. This being sunsetted, it could not be leveraged out without further specific new approvals by the RTM and BET. It would save the town perhaps $30 to $50 million in interest and accomplish a use of the expenditure's benefit more rapidly. The committee wished the concept to be reported, but did not think that an amendment to the resolution at this time would be productive. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Petroselli, Chairman of our Budget Overview Committee.
Good evening again. The Budget Overview Committee took this item up on October 16th. Steve Walko and Mike Mason of the BET were with us. Mary Ferry was also in attendance. Fred Baker is a member of the committee. He was there as well. Our vote on the resolution as is was 1 in favor, 7 against, 4 districts absent. Those districts were 1, 3, 9, and 11. We did vote on an amended version. It's taking out the second bullet point regarding limiting borrowing for capital expenditures. Voting on that, the BOC voted 5 in favor, 3 against, with 4 absent. The same districts were absent. At the right time, I'll be proposing that amendment.
Thank you. Vincent DeMarco with the Town Services Report. I'm sorry, with the Transportation Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The committee voted unanimously in September to postpone the item to this month in anticipation that the BET would give consideration to the concerns and actions suggested in the resolution. Considering the conclusions of the BET, the evaluation by the Finance Department, and that of Mr. Walco on behalf of the majority of the BET, and the board's conclusions, the committee voted 1 in favor, 8 against the item, with 2 abstentions and District 7 absent. No votes were cast. The no votes were cast primarily on the sense that the resolution had already served its purpose, and to go further, it would indicate a desire to micromanage the Finance Board. The 2 abstentions from the delegates of District 10 and 12 were cast on the premise that the resolution would have been much more useful had it focused on principles and objectives employed by the BET in general.
Thank you. Mr. Wells? On behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, on behalf of the committee, move to postpone this item indefinitely.
All right, that motion being offered on behalf of one of our committees does not require a second. That motion is debatable, and debate can go into the merits of the item itself. Discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to postpone item 1 indefinitely. Now, just so we understand, the effect of a motion to postpone indefinitely is to kill the item. And if it were to come back to us, it would have to go through the normal channels. So, discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. All right, I will call for a voice vote, this being a procedural issue. If you are in favor of killing this tonight, then you are going to vote in favor of this motion to postpone indefinitely. If you want to continue consideration of this tonight, you would vote against the Legislative and Rules Committee motion. All those in favor of the motion to postpone indefinitely, item number 1, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion has carried. Item number 5 now comes before us. Ellen Flanagan, Director of Personnel for the Board of Education.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Before I introduce the resolution, I'd like to recognize and thank Mr. Steve Anderson, Board of Ed member and Chairman of the Negotiations Committee, for his time, effort, and commitment to settling this teacher's contract. Resolved that the representative town meeting of the Town of Greenwich hereby approves the agreement between the Board of Education and the Greenwich Education Association representing teachers for the period of July 1st, 2009 to June 30th, 2012.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 5 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of the committees that considered this item, beginning with our Labor Contracts Committee report given by David Detchen of District 10.
Mr. Moderator, members of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting, your Labor Contracts Committee met with Steve Anderson, a member of the Greenwich Board of Education, and Ellen Flanagan, the Director of Personnel for the Greenwich School System, to discuss the collective bargaining agreement recently agreed upon between the Greenwich Board of Education and the Greenwich Education Association, the collective bargaining unit for teachers in the Greenwich School System. This agreement has been approved by the Board of Education and the GEA. Your Labor Contracts Committee voted to recommend its approval by the RTM. The vote was 4-1. The collective bargaining agreement covers a 3-year period from 1 July 2009 through 30 June 2012. The general wage increases are 2.9% in year 1, 3.0% in year 2, and 3.1% in year 3. The certified cost of contract is 2.31% without steps and 4.18% after such seniority steps are taken into account. The representatives of the Board of Education explained that they sought to include a performance pay concept in this collective bargaining agreement, but the Board of Education dropped this performance pay request literally at the last moment in the mediation phase that followed the initial negotiation phase of the contract negotiations. The Board of Education did so because the GEA resistance to this concept was so strong that there was no hope of adoption of any performance pay plan into the collective bargaining agreement unless the Board of Education would have been ready to make very substantial concessions in other areas, which the Board of Education was not willing to do. The Labor Contracts Committee expressed disappointment over this result and also expressed disappointment that the Superintendent of Schools apparently took a position on performance pay that was apparently not completely in sync with the Board of Education's stated effort. Other new or modified provisions of the contract include increases in the employee contributions to the PPO and EPO and health insurance programs, and the establishment of a health savings account plan with cash contributions by the board into the health savings account of each teacher who participates in the plan in order to incentivize participation in the HSA plan. A provision that teacher suspension hearings will be before the superintendent and not the Board of Education, and some modifications to the grievance procedure. Increases in the dollar amounts that the board will pay teachers for curriculum work and special projects, and increases for tuition reimbursement. The elimination of certain steps for all teachers other than those in the BA contract. This last item deserves a bit further comment. Many of our teachers come from further east in Connecticut and must undertake fairly long commutes in order to reach their places of employment here in the Greenwich school system. These steps were eliminated in the early years and are designed to increase the dollar amount of increases in salaries between remaining steps. This is done to create an incentive for teachers who commute and who already have been in the Greenwich school system for some time and have now obtained tenure to remain teachers in the Greenwich school system rather than to take a position, possibly at a lower pay level, in another school system located further to the east. As it is, the annual turnover rate in one recent year was 11%, and of that 11%, 39% of those leaving were those with 4 to 8 years of experience. This is only one of several programs that the Board of Education has undertaken to induce young teachers to remain teachers in the Greenwich school system rather than leaving to teach in school systems closer to their homes. Thus, the Board of Education is contemplating a daycare center for teachers and has already established a program to transport teachers to and from the COSCOB train system to one of our schools. The discussion with representatives of the Board of Education was informative and carried out in a relaxed and friendly and open atmosphere. The various members of the Labor Contracts Committee nevertheless expressed their disappointment and concern that the expenditure of significant amounts of money per pupil within the Greenwich school system have not resulted in standardized test results of a level that one would expect. Also, as previously mentioned, unhappiness was expressed over the failure to achieve the introduction of a performance pay program into the collective bargaining agreement. Indeed, the one dissenting vote within the Labor Contracts Committee was based upon unhappiness over this failure of the collective bargaining agreement to include such a performance pay concept and the ability of the board to achieve a consensus with GEA that teachers who stand out in terms of quality and performance should be allowed to be rewarded financially.
Thank you. Pamela Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
Thank you. Very little additional statements to add. The only thing I'll note is for the general wage increase, the average was 3%, which compared favorably with the prior contract, where the average was 3.27%. So even though a small percentage drop, it's moving in the right direction, and we'd like to see more of that. The committee voted 11-1 in favor. The one vote against was a general concern and I guess disagreement with the fact that there was an increase in the overall cost that went up 4.18%. But otherwise, the committee voted 11-1-0. Thanks.
Thank you. Bob Brady with the Education Committee report.
Good evening again. We met last Monday night on this. All districts were represented. Mr. Anderson and Dr. Flanagan represented the Board of Ed and the staff. The only thing I'd add to this is that while the general wage increase is 3.0% over at the average over the contract, the full cost increase in the certified cost sheet is 4.18%, which assumes that the 857 members of the bargaining unit remain in the bargaining unit over the 3 years and progress up the steps. So it basically takes into account both the steps, which are part of the contract, as well as the general wage increase. And it also includes the health care and other pieces. But that, with the assumption that the people don't change, we are looking at a almost 4.2% annual increase in this agreement. We voted 12-0-0 to recommend adoption of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 5. Jim Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, I was the one dissenting vote on the Labor Contracts Committee, and I just want to sort of give a little explanation. It goes beyond just pushing for a merit pay system. We lost that in the last GEA contract in arbitration. My rationale is we need to continue to push for it. If we don't continue to push for it, we'll never get it. But it goes beyond that. In the last GEA contract, there was a provision in the contract which allowed us to pay master teachers, there's actually a certification that a teacher gets, a bonus. Just like we pay a higher rate for people on the PhD track than the master's track than the BA track, if you went out and got a master's certification, you were eligible to be paid a bonus. This allows us to attract and retain the best science teachers, the best language teachers. So it's something we had in the last contract. The union came in and pushed to remove it. The reason they came in and pushed to remove it is not all teaching disciplines are eligible for master certification. Therefore, if not all the members are eligible for the merit bonus, none will be. That's headed in the wrong direction. It blows my mind. Once again, I stand up. I got calls from teachers after I said this last time that you would turn down additional pay. Just blows my mind. And that it's the union will step forward and say, by God, we don't want our people being paid a bonus. It's all for one or one for all with this bargaining unit. And we need to recognize that. That's why we need to take a harder line when we negotiate and move to pressing for merit pay, which, yes, ties pay to performance. Let me also point out that we've had a lot of discussion tonight on the BET budget message. You had the BET chairman get up, you had the chairman of the BOC get up, and let me quote from what they quoted to you earlier. On guidelines and general guidance from the BET, in addition, moderate increases in new labor contracts in the range of 2.9 to 3.75 increase in the total cost of the contract. Mr. Brady just reported that the total cost of this contract in the next fiscal year is in excess of 4%. So if we're going to wring our hands about the poor economic conditions we're in and how are we possibly going to avoid an 8%, 9% increase in the mill rate, folks, you're making that decision tonight, not in the budget meeting next May. When we approve a contract, we are locking in wage rates. Wage rates are the #1 item in the budget. And let me point out that the GEA for fiscal year 2008 represented $69 million thereabouts in total earnings. That represented 38.1% of all our pay on labor contracts in this town. So by voting for a 4% increase in the next budget cycle, which you lock in tonight with the vote on this contract, you are locking in 38% of your labor costs. If you lock it in, the only alternative when the budget message was read and it was discussed that we're going to have to reduce some certified staff positions and get back to a higher ratio of certified staff to students. If we lock in this budget increase, and I've got a child who's a kindergartner in the school system. I'm a supporter of the school system. I want the best school system for my child. But I also have to worry about the long-term health of the town. If we're going to lock in this wage increase, the only alternative to control the budget is to reduce the number of certified teaching positions, or certified staff positions. That would include administrators. Perhaps we will save money on the new superintendent.
Steve Anderson of the Board of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As Mr. Butel says, the cost of contract before you after all seniority steps is 4.18. It is important, obviously, in a cost of contract to quantify out the financial impact of a contract. As Mr. Brady explained, one of the things you have to do is you have to make assumptions. What we do when we prepare the cost of contract is we take our static table of organization, which is 857.5 GEA employees, and we move them forward every year, one step, depending upon where they are right now. That's where we end up with our numbers. Two very important things that do not appear in a cost of contract. One is any change in our FTE that comes about from enrollment change, either plus or, as we're in declining periods, minuses in terms of having less employees around. And the other very, very important thing is, if you remember when we come before you in May, we have a broken out line item that specifically is entitled salary savings. We will have turnover. This last year we had about 11% turnover, and it's safe to say that turnover results in higher paid teachers leaving the system either because of retirement or because of moving to another district, and we replace them with lower cost teachers. That number in the last budget, I believe, was about $1.3 million worth of budgeted savings. There's nothing hidden anywhere. It's extremely transparent. So if you take that and add that in to our cost of contract, you're down at a cost of contract that is approximately 3%. So yes, the 4.18 number is there, and that is the way I calculate the cost of contract. Do remember the two other moving parts that will cause this to be lower. One is enrollment change, and the other is the budgeted savings from staff turnover.
Further discussion on item 5. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 5, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 9, the last item on our agenda, now comes before us. Joseph Siciliano, our Director of Parks and Recreation.
Resolved that the sum of $647,022 be and the same hereby appropriated to be added to capital account number Z834-59710-25080, known as Grass Island Dredge.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 9 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, members and guests, this item was presented to the Finance Committee by Joe Siciliano, the Parks and Rec Commissioner, as well as Fred Walters from Marine Department. The dredging project was originally approved in 2004 for $1.3 million and seeks an additional $667,022 funding to complete the project. The increase was due primarily to material and fuel cost increases. The 1.95 total project cost is based on firm bids, so we don't anticipate an increase in that estimate. The area was last dredged in 1950, which was to have a 25-year life, so we're pretty well past that. Based on testing, the project has been approved by the state and federal agencies. There are contaminated as well as highly contaminated materials. Some of the contaminated materials are eligible for open water disposal and capping, while other highly contaminated material require removal to a landfill. By December 15th, the town will remove 19,000 cubic yards of contaminated material, which will be capped with 35,000 cubic yards of material received from the state from a project that was funded in Norwalk. This will save the town $500,000. After December 15th and finishing by January 30th, 4,000 cubic yards of highly contaminated material, this number being reduced from 8,000, will be moved and remediated at a cost of $160 per cubic yard. This material will be barged to New Haven for processing, and that processing will include adding a mixture of cement and then landfilled in Meriden, Connecticut. Still working on the Parks and Rec Department are still working on final approvals for the New Haven and Meriden aspects, but expect to receive that soon. The department assisted in identifying funding sources for the project. First, postponing its approved $200,000 appropriation for the Island Ferry boat. Second, saving a budgeted $50,000 by using town staff to build the Grass Island dock, float, and piles. And third, reallocating $50,000 from the Coscob dock and seawall project, using $50,000 of its $100,000 funding for planning, and then reallocating the balance to this project. The community impact will include the hauling of 2 barges of material per day under 24-hour operations. There will be some noise and lights for a 15-day period. Of 221 slips, only 101 can currently be used. This project will allow the town to earn an additional $47,000 annually, which, at its estimated life of 25 years, could generate as much as $1.25 million. Of course, that would be less on a net present value basis, but it's a pretty nice number to know you're offsetting the cost that we're spending on a project. We don't get that too often. Parks and Rec recommends has recommended sediment analysis and testing again in 15 years to benchmark for future dredging. It was also noted that each town marina now has a stormwater runoff management plan to minimize future contaminants. Parks and Rec's department is to be commended for working to find ways to reduce costs and to prudently spend its allocated budget, which we believe sets an excellent example for other town departments to follow. The committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Karen Sotacon with the Parks and Recreation Committee report.
This will be a little bit redundant, but since it's the last item, I will indulge you. Joe Siciliano was with the committee to present this item. The Grass Island Municipal Marina, housing 221 boat slips and 50 moorings, and the pump-out dock periodically need dredging to maintain the viability and level of the service expected by the users. Since this area was last dredged in 1950 and in 1975 around the small area of the former fuel dock, now the pump-out dock, the marina has experienced ongoing siltation, which resulted in unusable moorings due to water depth. 101 mooring slips are currently unusable, a loss of $40,000 a year in revenue. To restore the marina to its full capacity, the dredging project will remove 24,000 cubic yards of sediment from the marina basin and the harbor. The Department of Parks and Rec has spent several years applying for and receiving the necessary state and federal permits, which are issued by the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The permits allow a specific dredging window of October 1st through January 31st of the next year to protect spawning fisheries in the area. While the permits are in hand, they are for specific and a limited time, and the DEP permit has already been extended once, but additional extensions are not likely, so it is prudent to act now. The permit called for the removal of approximately 19,000 cubic yards of dredged material from the marina basin and the harbor to be placed in central Long Island Sound near New Haven. It will be capped with 35,000 cubic yards of suitable dredged material from another project in Norwalk, for which the town is responsible. However, the $500,000 cost of capping is being borne by the state of Connecticut as they provide a one-time funding allowance for capping materials to a number of dredge projects in the state. The remaining 4,000 cubic yards is highly contaminated and must be transported to an upland disposal area for further extensive treatment. The previous budget of $1,003,000 was in the 0405 capital budget. with sampling and testing costs, surveying costs, consultant fees, higher fuel and labor costs. The total cost of the project has risen to $1,947,22, an increase of $647. It is advisable to act now and approve this project. Further delay would increase the cost of dredging, lose the availability of capping material, and threaten the ability to dredge in the future if regulations regarding disposal of material in Long Island Sound were ever altered. The Finance Committee explained on the last point that Joe explained to us that there were 3 projects from the 08-09 budget that lapsed. The $50,000 was returned in its entirety from the dock for Grass Island, which the staff was able to build in-house. There was a partial return of $50,000 out of $100,000 that had been appropriated for the Ferris dock and seawall in the Coscob Marina. The $50,000 was retained to do the permitting, and $200,000, in funds was postponed by the department as they reevaluate the new ferry boat needs, and will probably come back in the 09-10 budget cycle with another appropriation for perhaps $500,000. The lapsing of these funds helps reallocate the money towards the dredging project. The committee was totally satisfied with the presentation and the premise of the need to proceed with the dredging as it is currently planned, and our vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 9. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 9, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the results of the vote on item number 5, which is the teacher contract. Those in favor, 104. Opposed, 72. Abstaining, 9. That item is carried. We will await the result of the vote on item number 9 before proceeding to adjourn the meeting. Those in favor, 182. Opposed, 1. Abstaining, 1. That item has carried. There being no further business to come before the meeting and absent objection, this meeting is now adjourned. Say goodnight, Gracie. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe trip home.